What if your greatest battle wasn't against the world, but against yourself? We live surrounded by stimuli, calls, offers, pleasures packaged in promises of instant happiness. The world doesn't ask, it demands. It doesn't whisper, it shouts. But the soul is shy. It doesn't compete for attention. It waits, and often it's forgotten. Have you ever felt that? That quiet discomfort, when something inside you knows what's right, but another side, a louder one, demands the opposite. This conflict isn't new. It's been within us from the beginning. We live in an era of relentless desires, of clicks, of I want it now, of why wait. But there's a kind of wisdom that isn't revealed in haste. It reveals itself in waiting, in resistance, in the silence between impulse and decision. Temptation doesn't need to shout, it just needs to resemble what you already want. The world offers many fruits, all beautiful, accessible, packaged for pleasure. But not every fruit is nourishment, and not everything that glitters should be touched. How many times have you fallen because you couldn't bear the delay of what you wanted now? How many times have you given in, only to regret it later? Maybe you're at that point right now, facing a choice, with a voice inside you, torn between what relieves and what liberates. This video isn't about condemnation, it's about awareness. It's about understanding why resistance is often more sacred than victory. Stay until the end, because today, we won't just tell a biblical story, we'll journey through it together, not with judgment, but with questions, not with moralism, but with clarity. Perhaps, in the end, you'll realize that the strength you seek was already there, inside you, just waiting for the right moment to be remembered. Subscribe to this channel if you're not looking for distractions, but direction. If what you want is more than answers, if what you seek is self-mastery, inner peace, and wisdom that stands the test of time, then take a deep breath. Today, we'll uncover the Stoic message behind resist the world. Steadfast as stone, the temptation of Eve. In the beginning, there was order. A breath of peace hovered over all things. Harmony wasn't achieved through effort, it simply was. The garden, woven by divine hands, overflowed with life in its purest form. The leaves danced with the wind, unhurried. The rivers flowed without strife. Beauty didn't shout, it simply existed, silent, abundant, unquestionable. And at the heart of that paradise, there was a boundary, a tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't evil. There was no malice in its existence, but there was something different about it, something untouchable. The rule was clear. They could eat from everything, except that tree. This boundary, so simple and silent, was where freedom and responsibility met. Eve walked among the trees, and her soul, like the garden, was still whole. But something within her began to stir. Not an obvious evil, but a subtle restlessness. The garden offered everything, but not everything. And that exception began to pulse in her mind with growing force. Why not? She wondered. If all is so good, why would something be denied to me? The doubt didn't arise from evil, but from the desire to understand, to possess what was beyond the permitted. God's silence wasn't neglect. It was space for maturity, a patient waiting. But humanity, newly formed, didn't yet know how to wait, didn't yet know how to trust what it couldn't see. And it's at this point that the world as we know it begins to change. Then came the voice, not a threatening voice, not an aggressive one. It came with sweetness, with logic, with charm, sibilant, almost gentle. The serpent didn't impose anything. It simply planted another idea. You will not surely die, it said. And with that, the tension within grew. Doubt disguised itself as reason. Curiosity gained arguments. Desire was adorned with words of twisted wisdom. Eve listened, but it wasn't just the serpent speaking. It was her own desire that now had a voice. The fruit, until then harmless, shone brighter, not with its own light, but with the light of a hungry gaze. The promise seemed fair. To be like God, to have open eyes, to know, to understand. The impulse, once restrained, began to swell. Doubt turned to conviction. The boundary became an obstacle, and reason bowed. Eve reached out, a small gesture, a simple act. But in spiritual, cosmic, and human terms it was an earthquake. There were no claps, no storms. The fall didn't come with violence. It came with a serene touch. Eve's bite made no sound, but the universe fell silent. And in that instant, humanity tasted the flavor of fulfilled desire, and the emptiness that follows. After the fruit, the void. After the pleasure, the shame, the eyes that once looked to heaven now hid, the nakedness that was natural now weighed like guilt. They hid among the trees, not to escape God, but to flee from themselves. Paradise, once home, now felt like a mirror that revealed too much. Then, God walked through the garden, not with anger, but with presence. His question echoed, "Where are you?" But he knew. He always knew. The question wasn't geographical. It wasn't about location. It was about the state of the soul. Where are you? Meant, at what point in your consciousness did you lose yourself? Eve, like each of us, had to face what comes after the impulsive choice. The regret that isn't expressed with words, but with heavy silence. The guilt that doesn't ache in the body, but in the soul. The what if. That echoes in the mind for days, for years, for generations. Time, once violated, cannot be undone. And yet, even in the face of pain, there's a lesson, a clarity that only error can provide. Eve understood, too late, that true power wasn't in grasping everything, but in knowing how to resist what isn't yours to take yet. The fall wasn't just disobedience, it was impatience, an inability to wait, to trust, to stand firm as stone, even when everything inside clamored for immediate pleasure. This story isn't just about sin, it's about choice, about impulse versus conscience, about misused freedom, about how the breaking of a principle begins long before the action. It begins with the idea we allow to take root. Eve's fall is both an archetypal tale and an everyday reality, because every day each of us walks through invisible gardens, and every day there are fruits shining before us, voices calling, arguments seducing. And every day we're called to decide, to yield, or to resist. Temptation doesn't shout, it doesn't force, it just waits. And the subtler it is, the more dangerous. What seems small today may be an abyss tomorrow. And that's why true strength isn't in conquering the world, but in resisting yourself. Eve fell as any of us could have fallen. And so, her story isn't distant, it's a mirror. The garden is symbolic, but the dilemma is real. The boundary still exists, not in a tree, but in our daily decisions, and the serpent still speaks not with scales, but with internal arguments that pull us away from what's essential. This is the pain of awareness, but it's also the beginning of wisdom. Stoicism teaches us that true freedom isn't about doing what we want, but resisting what enslaves us from within. Unrestrained will, desire that burns without reflection, impulses that promise pleasure but deliver regret. These aren't signs of freedom, but of bondage. Eve didn't fall because of ignorance. She knew. The command was clear. The boundary was drawn. But like so many of us, she stumbled over what seemed small, harmless, justifiable. Temptation wasn't was seductive logic. It's just a fruit. Yet ancient wisdom knows it's never about the object, but the meaning. Not the act, but what it reveals about us. Double quotes. No great thing is created suddenly. Everything is the fruit of discipline. Epictetus. Eve didn't err from lack of intelligence, but from lack of discipline. The same discipline many of us lack. When we yield to what we know weakens us. We want answers before their time. We want results without maturation. We want the fruit before its season. For Eve, the fruit wasn't just food. It was a symbol. The desire to control what she didn't yet understand, to possess what wasn't yet hers. It was the impatience of one who rejects no as care. It was distrust disguised as autonomy. It is in moments of leisure and pleasure that character is truly tested. Seneca. It's easy to seem virtuous when everything's under control. The test comes when things are sweet, easy, seductive. Character isn't proven in pain but in comfort. Not on the battlefield, but on the couch. It's when no one's watching, when the choice seems small, that the true self emerges. Stoic philosophy speaks of mastery, not over others but over oneself, because the man who doesn't master his own thoughts, emotions, and impulses will be mastered by anything external. A harsh word, a frustration, a temptation, any wind can knock him down. If you master yourself, you master the world. Marcus Aurelius. This is the virtue of resistance. Not empty pride, not artificial repression, but maturity. To resist isn't to refuse living, but to know what's worth living for. It's understanding that pleasure isn't the enemy, it needs limits. That desire isn't wrong, but it needs direction. That today's no may be tomorrow's freedom. Eve reminds us of something fundamental. Not every soft voice comes from the light. Not every offer should be accepted. Not every desire deserves to be fulfilled. Stoic wisdom invites us to stand firm in life, not with bitter rigidity, but with inner stability. The wise aren't easily shaken. They observe, reflect, and only then decide. Their strength isn't in confrontation, but in control, in the silence that precedes the right choice. If Eve had taken a deep breath, if she'd listened more to stillness than the serpent's whisper, perhaps the world's fate would have been different. But perhaps this fall is humanity's great mirror, the eternal struggle between impulse and conscience. And it's precisely in this tension that Stoicism thrives. And you, how many times have you felt that subtle internal pressure, almost imperceptible, nudging you towards something you knew, deep down, you shouldn't do? How many times have you heard not with your ears, but with a restless heart, that soft, insistent whisper, convincing you, just one more drink, it won't destroy you? Reply to that message: no one has to know. You deserve this now. Why wait? These voices aren't monsters. They're not demonic screams. They come gently, logically, almost considerately. But behind the mild tone lies the trap. And often we give in, not because we're weak, but because we're tired. Tired of waiting, resisting, carrying invisible burdens the world doesn't see. So we yield, for relief, for the now. But afterward comes the silence. And in that silence, the void is the emptiness you feel today, the echo of a choice made in haste, impulse, absence of reflection. Is that unease in your soul the consequence of listening to desire over conscience? Are you living in your own invisible prison, trapped in patterns you created and now don't know how to break? How often do we blame others, parents, partners, colleagues, leaders, for decisions that were, in truth, our own? Who deceived you? And why do you still use their name as an excuse not to grow? Maybe you're waiting for a sign, for the world to change, for external confirmation that it's time to act. But maybe, just maybe, what's being tested isn't your patience with the world, but your resistance to yourself. Maybe the delay isn't punishment. Maybe the silence that unsettles you is your preparation. Have you considered that sometimes what looks like stagnation is actually maturation? Life doesn't rush what has deep roots, and you don't have to yield to every impulse just because the world taught you that wanting is reason enough to act. Eve's story isn't just an ancient tale, it's a living metaphor, a reminder that every day you'll face choices. Not all will seem dangerous. Some will come with shine, with arguments, with good feelings, but the choice will still be yours. And that's where virtue reveals itself, not in saying no to obvious evil, but in resisting the disguised good. Every day, you're called to choose between impulse and virtue, between what relieves now and what builds long term, between pleasure that numbs and discipline that liberates. Stoicism doesn't teach repression, it teaches clarity, the art of discerning what's truly essential. And this clarity only comes with practice, with intention, with silence. So look within. Perhaps your greatest battle today isn't out there, it's between what you want and what you know you need, between the serpent's hiss and your conscience's whisper. Eve fell not because she was evil, but because she was human. And so are you. But being human isn't an excuse to live enslaved by impulse. It's an invitation to grow. To resist. To choose every day the path of awareness. The stone doesn't fight the river. It doesn't complain, doesn't bend, doesn't try to control the flow. It just remains. And thus it shapes the waters. With time, with patience, with presence. We live in days where urgency is the world's language. People rush to win, to conquer, to accumulate. But what's truly valuable doesn't hurry, doesn't rush, doesn't yield to the scream of emotions. What's valuable is like the stone, seemingly unmoving, yet inwardly powerful. In a world that rewards speed, the wise choose steadiness, consistency. What doesn't bend to temptation, what doesn't surrender to the first seductive voice. The stone isn't stubborn, it's conscious. It knows that yielding to the moment may cost what took years to build. It knows that whoever controls themselves has already won, because resistance isn't weakness, it's mastery. Mastery of self, it's freedom, the hardest, the truest kind. And if at any point in this story something stirred within you, if you felt this struggle between impulse and purpose is also yours, maybe you're not alone. Maybe you just need to remember who you are and who you've chosen to become. If this video touched something deep in your soul, consider following this channel. Here, every story is a silent compass, a reminder that you can live with purpose, steadiness, and meaning, even when everything around you screams for you to lose yourself. See you in the next video. And until then, stand firm, not because the world demands it, but because your soul deserves it. Stand firm, like a stone,